Welcome, class, to the first activity in Lesson 7 of Unit 6, representing a percentage problem with an equation. All right, so you may remember that we worked on percentages a few units ago, so they don't disappear. We bring them back, and so we're going to represent a percentage problem with an equation now. Okay, so some of these problems we've worked on figuring out before through other ways, using other strategies, but now we're going to be using an equation. All right, so for some of these here, we always want to be aware of ways to be able to make sense of a problem and be able to figure out if something is true or not. And sometimes we can make it fairly easy if we just think about what each of the details that we're given means. So for example, in number 1a, is 60% of 400 equal to 87? Well, let's think about what this means. 60%. Remember with benchmark percentages, 50%, that's half. So 60% would be more than half. Okay, so more than half in this case of 400. Well, half of 400 would be 200, right? So it's going to be more than 200. So is it 87? Heck no, it's definitely not. That makes no sense at all. It is not going to be 87. Okay, so we need not sweat that out through any other ways of thinking about it. Is 60% of 200 equal to 87? So again, 60%, it's more than half. Well, half of 200 would be 100, so more than that would be more than 100. So it's definitely not 87. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to say no to that. All right, and then for part C, is 60% of 120 equal to 87? 60% is more than half. Well, let's see, half of 120 would be 60. It's going to be more than that. It might be. So in this case here, it's not going to be quite so easy to see. So we need to think about another way to figure this out here. So 60% of 120 equals 87. So let's see here. We need to figure out 60% of 120. And so if you remember back to the previous unit, let me actually do it with the pencil here. 60%, if you remember, is the same thing as 60 over 100. All right? And when we have a fraction of some number, we're talking about multiplying. 60 over 100 times 120. So let's see what this actually equals here. Let's see if it actually equals 87. Okay. So 60 over 100 times 120. Well, let's see here. 60 times 120. Well, I'm just going to do 6 times 12, and I'm going to get 72. And then I'm going to see that I have 1, 2 zeros, so I'm going to add those 2 zeros on because I'm multiplying. So 7,200 or 7,200. And then we have 100. We could consider this over 1, right? So it's just going to still be 100 here. And I notice here, I've got at the end of our numbers here, I have a 0 over a 0. I can cancel those zeros. And then I have another 0 over another 0. I can cancel those zeros. I'm left with 72 over 1, which is just 72. And so is that 87? It is not. Okay, so it's a little bit closer, but we need to at least do a little bit of math there. You might have been able to see that with all the zeros that were involved here, we weren't going to have something ending up at 87. Okay, but I wanted to show you this because it's crucial to see how that works, because we're going to use this strategy in other problems. So 60% of 120, that involves multiplying the fraction form of that times the number, 120 in this case. So let's make sense of that with number 2. So it says here, number 2, 60% of x is equal to 87. So write an equation that expresses the relationship between the 60%, the x, and the 87. Okay, so here is the deal. So we know that 60% of x is going to involve the fraction form times x. So it's going to be 60 over 100, and it's going to be times x. And we don't know what x is just yet, right? But it's going to be times x. And notice this x does not mean times. This x, we're talking about the actual x that they mentioned here. Okay, and it says that it is equal to, so I'm going to put an equal sign, 87. All right. So they want us to actually solve this equation. So we've got to think about how would we solve this equation here. So we have 60 over 100 times x equals 87. Remember, we want to get x by itself. We want to move everything else that's on this same side of the equal sign away from the x to the opposite side of the equal sign by doing the opposite. So if this is 60 over 100 times x, the opposite of times would be divide. So we're going to divide by 60 over 100 here, and that's just going to leave us with x. So I'm not going to draw that part out. It's just going to be x. But over here, it means we're going to divide by 60 over 100. And again, this is the part that's going to maybe still look a little bit strange to you. So we'll write it a different way in a moment, but I want you to see this does mean divide. 87 divided by 60 over 100. So I'm going to use all this space here. So 87 divided by 60 over 100. And that is going to mean, since we were dividing by a fraction, that we actually need to make this into multiplication, right? So we need to make this into 87 times 100 over 60. All right, so when we do that here, I can see 87 times 100 is just going to be 8,700. You can think about that as 87 times 1 being 87, and then 2 zeros to add on. This is going to be all over 60, right? 60 because it's 60 times 1. And then I can see a 0 on top of a 0. I'm going to wipe those out. And so I have 870 divided by 6. Let's see what that gives us. 870 divided by 6. 6 goes into 8 one time. 1 times 6 is 6. 8 minus 6 is 2. Bring down to 7. 6 goes into 27 4 times. 4 times 6 being 24. 27 take away 24 is 3. And then I have this 0 I can bring down right here. There's the 0. 6 goes into 30 5 times. So x would equal 145. All right, that was for number 2. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to erase everything except for the equation. So all this other stuff I'm going to take down. And then we're going to move on to number 3. And number 3 says, write an equation to help you find the value of each variable and solve the equation. Okay, so same idea. 60% of C. We're going to change the percentage to a fraction and put it times C. So I'm just going to go ahead for the equation. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write 60 over 100 C equals 43.2. All right, so we have that there. And then to work that out, okay, again, remember we're going to end up dividing by 60 over 100, just like we did here. We divided by 60 over 100 here, which means we actually multiply times 100 over 60. So what we can do is we can just go ahead and we can take this, and we can know that we're going to have 43.2 times 100 over 60. All right, so 43.2 times 100. Remember, if you're multiplying times 100, we're just moving the decimal point 2 places. We're not adding 2 zeros this time because we actually have a number behind the decimal point. We're going to have to move that one spot first, and that leaves us with just only 1 0 that we're going to be adding. So we would be talking about 4320. All right, 4320, and that's going to be divided by 60. So 4320, again, that comes from this. We moved it one spot here, and then we need to go one more spot because this has 2 zeros. So that's what we're dealing with here. 432 divided by 6 is what we're going to get after we cancel the zeros. So 432 divided by 6, again, this is good practice for your division. So 432 goes in. And 6 is going to go out. 6 goes into 4. No, that doesn't go into there, but it goes into 43 7 times. 7 times 6 is 42. 43 minus 42 is 1. I'm going to bring this 2 down. 6 goes into 12 twice. 2 times 6 is 12, so we have no remainder, so that means we are to the end. So 72 is what we're talking about here. You want to be able to make sense of this here. 60% of some number is 43.2. So what we know then is that 43.2 is going to be more than half of that number, right? So, and that is in fact true. 43.2, that's more than half of 72, okay? Because half of 72 would be 36. So 43.2 makes sense to be more than half of that. So 72 makes sense as far as being that number. All right, let's erase that and let's get on to the, oops, wrong button. Let's get on to the next part, part B. It says 38% of E is 190. So you want to first get that equation written out. And so 38% of E equals 90. So let's go ahead and write that out. And 38% is 38 out of 100, right? And then E, I put the E right next to it because it's multiplying, equals 190. All right, so again, I'm kind of going a little bit faster, but we can refer back to this one here. This is the first one we worked on, where we divided by 60 over 100 to figure out our answer here. So here we divided, again, by 60 over 100, which means we multiplied by 100 over 60, right? Because dividing, you can switch between dividing and multiplying by simply finding the reciprocal of that second number. So in this case here, we're going to be taking 190 and we're going to be multiplying it times 100 over 38. Again, if you want, you can rewind the video and watch this first part that we did for a little bit more explanation. So we 190 times 100 over 38. Okay, so 190 times 100, I'm going to have now 3 zeros after 19. I have 1 here and 2 more. So 1, 2, and 3. That's going to be over 38. Now, unfortunately here, we don't have any zeros we can cancel, right? You don't automatically cancel them. It has to be a 0 on top of another 0. We don't have that here. So we have to work from this value here. Let's see what we can do here. Let's go ahead and make up our long division. So 19,000 divided by 38. All right, 38 can't go into 1, and it can't go into 19, but it can go into 190. Okay, it can go into 190. So this is one that the better you are at mental math, the better you can do this here. If I take 38 times 5, okay, if I do 30 times 5, I get 150, and 8 times 5 is 40. Put the 150 and 40 together, that's 190. So I know it's going to be exactly 5 times. Okay, and then so this is going to be 190. Okay, and so the way you can look at this here, if 38 goes into 190 5 times, see these 2 zeros at the end? That tells us it's going to go into the whole thing. We can just add on another 2 zeros here, 500. Okay, 190 is what it goes into 5 times, and just add these 2 zeros on. It's going to go 500 times into the whole number. So 500 is what we're talking about. Let's see if it makes sense on this end. 38% of some number, so 38% is less than half, right, is 190. So 190 is less than half. So, okay, so if it was exactly half, then you'd be talking about just under 400, right? It would be 380, but it's less than that. So this number would have to be bigger than 400, and so 500 makes some sense there. So 500 is your answer for B. All right.